In the sprawling expanse of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the relentless hum of rolling suitcases and intercom announcements filled the air, mingling with the murmur of hurried travelers weaving through the labyrinth of terminals. Amid the cacophony, Jasmine Carter moved with purposeful strides, her nursing scrubs slightly rumpled from a long humanitarian mission overseas. The exhaustion etched on her face was tempered by a glimmer of hope for the quiet flight ahead, a chance to finally rest and reflect on the months she had spent tending to those in desperate need. Before going deeper into the story, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. Jasmine approached Gate C-22, a sleek, polished area reserved for boarding passengers of Skylux Airways, a luxury airline celebrated for its exclusive first-class service and impeccable hospitality. She clutched her first-class ticket tightly, the small piece of paper representing not just a seat, but a sanctuary from the chaos she had endured. As she reached the gate, the attendant greeted her with a practiced smile, scanning her ticket and passport with swift efficiency. The line behind Jasmine buzzed with a mix of business travelers and vacationers, their varied attire a tapestry of the world's cultures and ambitions. Yet Jasmine's presence seemed to command a quiet dignity. She was not merely another passenger. She was a healer returning home, her spirit weary but unbroken. Her dark eyes scanned the crowd briefly before settling on the polished floor ahead, her thoughts drifting to the family waiting for her arrival. As the boarding call echoed through the terminal, Jasmine stepped forward, the weight of her journey pressing lightly on her shoulders. The first-class cabin awaited, a haven of plush leather seats, muted lighting, and the promise of peace. She was eager to sink into its comfort, to let the gentle hum of the engines lull her into rest. What she did not anticipate was the subtle shift in the atmosphere as she crossed the threshold. A white woman seated near the front glanced up sharply, her expression tightening as her gaze landed on Jasmine. There was a flicker of unease, a guardedness that seemed out of place in the luxury cabin. Jasmine, unaware of the silent scrutiny, moved toward her assigned seat, offering a polite nod to the flight attendant who was ready to assist her. The attendant, a young man with a hesitant smile, paused, glancing between Jasmine and the woman. The tension in the air thickened imperceptibly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Jasmine's heart quickened. Though she told herself it was merely the fatigue speaking, she settled into her seat, the soft leather enveloping her, and reached for the small blanket folded neatly on the armrest. Yet, the quiet was shattered moments later when the woman stood abruptly, her voice cutting through the cabin's calm. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp and insistent. "I believe there's been some mistake. This seat is mine." Jasmine looked up, confusion knitting her brows. "This is my seat," she replied gently, holding up her ticket. "First class, seat 2A. The woman's eyes narrowed. "No, it's not. You must be in economy. This is a first-class cabin." Passengers nearby turned their heads, some curious, others uncomfortable with the sudden confrontation. The flight attendant stepped forward cautiously, glancing at Jasmine's ticket and then at the woman. "Ma'am, please, let's resolve this calmly." Jasmine felt a swell of indignation but kept her voice steady. "My ticket is valid. I've flown this route many times. I'm entitled to this seat." The woman folded her arms, her posture rigid. "I don't care who you are. I'm asking you to move." An elderly man seated across the aisle shifted in his seat, watching the exchange with a furrowed brow. Other passengers exchanged glances, the mood in the cabin growing tense. Jasmine's mind raced. She had come here tired, needing respite, not conflict. Yet, here she was, being challenged without cause. The flight attendant, caught between duty and discomfort, murmured, "Miss, could you please step aside so we can sort this out?" Jasmine rose slowly, maintaining her composure. I'm not moving. This is my seat. I have every right to be here. The woman's voice rose, drawing more attention. You're not welcome here. This is a first-class cabin, not a place for people like you. The words hung in the air, stark and painful. Jasmine's breath hitched, but she refused to let the sting show. Around her, the cabin fell into a hush, the other passengers watching the unfolding scene with a mixture of shock and unease. A flight attendant nearby approached the lead attendant, whispering urgently before he turned back to Jasmine. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you again to move to economy. Please understand, we're just following protocol. Jasmine's eyes flashed with quiet fire. I am following protocol. This is my seat. As the boarding continued behind them, the divide in the cabin grew more pronounced. The woman's glare burned into Jasmine's back as she sat down again, gripping the armrests tightly. The soft murmur of whispered conversations swelled. Some voices expressing sympathy, others discomfort at the confrontation. Jasmine reached into her bag, pulling out a photo of the children she had cared for during her mission phases full of hope and resilience. She pressed the image to her chest briefly, drawing strength. This was not simply about a seat on a plane. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to rest after a journey of service. The flight attendant resumed his post, eyes darting nervously between Jasmine and the disgruntled passenger. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the imminent departure, but the tension in the cabin lingered, unresolved. Jasmine settled back, her posture firm yet calm. Around her, the other passengers shifted uneasily, some whispering, others watching silently. She stared out the window at the sprawling tarmac, the planes lined up like gleaming silver birds waiting to take flight. In that moment, Jasmine knew the flight would be far from peaceful. But she also understood that her presence here was a quiet challenge to the assumptions that had been hurled her way. She was more than her appearance, more than the stereotypes that sought to confine her. As the plane prepared to taxi toward the runway, Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. The journey ahead was not only across the skies, but through the complicated landscape of human judgment and prejudice, and she was ready to face it head-on. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft ambient glow as passengers settled into their seats, the gentle murmur of conversations and the rustling of magazines filling the air. Jasmine Carter remained seated in 2A, her posture composed but alert, aware that the earlier tension had not dissipated. The woman who had confronted her now sat a few rows away, her expression tight with displeasure, casting furtive glances toward Jasmine whenever she thought no one was watching. Moments after the seatbelt signs flickered on, a flight attendant approached Jasmine with a hesitant smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Miss Carter, if you don't mind, there's been a request from the front cabin. They've asked if you could possibly move to economy for the duration of the flight. Jasmine's brow furrowed, disbelief mingling with a rising tide of frustration. Excuse me? She replied, her voice calm but firm. I have a valid first-class ticket. There's no reason for me to move. The attendant shifted uneasily. I understand, ma'am, but the request comes from other passengers who are uncomfortable. Jasmine's gaze swept the cabin, noting the stiffened shoulders and averted eyes of those nearby. The unspoken message was clear. Her presence, though legitimate, was unwelcome. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm sorry, but I will remain in my assigned seat. The attendant nodded reluctantly and moved away, but the atmosphere had shifted. A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin, some passengers exchanging furtive looks, others shaking their heads in quiet disapproval. Jasmine felt the weight of their stares, a silent judgment that pressed against her as heavily as the seatbelt across her lap. The woman who had first confronted her rose abruptly, her voice loud enough to draw attention. This is ridiculous. I paid for first class, and I don't want to sit near someone who doesn't belong here. A few heads turned toward her, some with surprise, others with discomfort. The flight attendant approached once more, this time with a firmer tone. "Ma'am, please. We ask that you remain seated. There's no need to cause a scene." Jasmine met the woman's glare steadily. "I belong here just as much as you do. I have a ticket, and I've been nothing but respectful." The woman scoffed, folding her arms. "You don't understand how these things work." Jasmine's eyes flashed. "No, I understand perfectly. I've flown this route many times, and I've never been treated like an intruder until now." The cabin crew exchanged uneasy glances, caught between their duty to maintain order and the uncomfortable reality unfolding before them. Another attendant approached Jasmine discreetly, whispering, "If you move to economy, I can offer you a voucher for a future flight." Jasmine shook her head firmly. "Thank you, but no. This isn't about compensation. It's about fairness." The murmurs grew louder as passengers shifted in their seats, some whispering words of encouragement, others casting sideways glances that betrayed their discomfort. Jasmine felt a mix of isolation and solidarity, the complicated dance of human reactions to a challenge they were unprepared to face. Across the aisle, a businessman in a crisp suit leaned toward his companion, muttering, "This is absurd. She's just doing her job. Why make it harder for her?" His companion nodded, but the woman who had challenged Jasmine was already gathering her belongings, her eyes fixed on Jasmine with a glare that burned with unspoken resentment. The flight attendant returned, his demeanor more urgent. "Miss Carter, I'm going to have to insist that you move to economy. The situation is escalating." Jasmine's voice was calm but resolute. "I'm not moving. I paid for this seat, and I'm entitled to it." Passengers nearby began to murmur in approval, their voices a quiet chorus of support. A young mother whispered to her child, "See? You stand up for yourself." The woman who had demanded Jasmine's removal stood near the galley, speaking into her phone with a fervor that suggested she was seeking reinforcements. The cabin crew exchanged worried looks, recognizing the potential for the situation to spiral further. Jasmine's hands rested on her lap, fingers clenched tightly. She felt every eye in the cabin on her, the weight of their expectations and judgments pressing down. Yet she refused to be moved, refusing to let fear or prejudice dictate her place. A fellow passenger, a middle-aged man in a tailored blazer, leaned across the aisle toward Jasmine. "You're handling this with grace," he said quietly. "Don't let them push you around." Jasmine offered a small, appreciative smile. The man's quiet support was a small beacon amid the storm of hostility. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the tension remained palpable. The flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, but their eyes betrayed a discomfort that no amount of training could fully erase. Jasmine settled back into a seat, steadying her breath, preparing for the long hours ahead. She thought of the people she had cared for on her mission, their resilience, their courage in the face of adversity. Their strength fueled her resolve now. This was not merely a battle for a seat. It was a stand against the invisible barriers that sought to divide and diminish. The cabin lights flickered as the engines roared to life, the plane beginning its journey into the sky. Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, centering herself amidst the storm of whispered judgments and pointed glances. She was here, in her rightful place, and she would not be moved. The cabin's low hum crescendoed into a tense chorus as the white woman's voice rose sharply, slicing through the muted conversations like a jagged blade. "I'm not sitting next to her. I paid for first class. She doesn't belong here." Heads turned, passengers caught in the uncomfortable spotlight of the escalating dispute. The flight attendants exchanged glances, their training tested by the rising storm of prejudice and defiance. Jasmine Carter sat upright, her eyes steady and unyielding. "I have a valid ticket," she said firmly, her voice calm but resolute. I am entitled to this seat, just as you are to yours." The woman's glare hardened, and she took a step forward, voice louder now, drawing the attention of the entire cabin. "This is ridiculous. If she can't respect the boundaries, then someone needs to make her leave." A young flight attendant approached cautiously, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Ma'am, please, let's keep this calm. We're trying to resolve the situation." Jasmine rose to her feet, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her tone steady despite the pounding of her heart. Around her, the cabin fell into a hush, the tension palpable as passengers watched, caught between curiosity and discomfort. The woman's voice climbed again, louder and more insistent. "If she doesn't leave, I'll make sure the crew removes her. This isn't acceptable." The lead flight attendant, a woman with a poised but weary expression, stepped forward. "Miss Carter, please understand that we want to maintain a comfortable environment for all passengers." Jasmine met her gaze evenly. "I am comfortable, and I am here by right. I'm asking for the same respect everyone else receives." Murmurs rippled through the cabin, some voices quietly supporting Jasmine, others withholding judgment. The atmosphere tightened, the invisible walls of bias pressing closer. Just as the situation seemed poised to spiral further, the sound of footsteps echoed from the front of the cabin. A man in a tailored suit appeared, his presence commanding immediate attention. "I'm the airline's customer relations manager," he announced, his voice calm but authoritative. "What seems to be the problem here?" The woman who had caused the disturbance turned toward him, her expression shifting from triumph to uncertainty. "This passenger is refusing to move to economy, and it's causing unrest." The manager's eyes settled on Jasmine, who met his gaze without hesitation. "I have a first-class ticket," she explained simply. "I'm entitled to this seat." The manager nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for clarifying. I'll look into this." He turned toward the flight attendants, issuing quiet instructions that quickly diffused the brewing conflict. The woman who had challenged Jasmine was gently but firmly asked to remain in her seat, while the crew reassured other passengers that the matter was under control. Jasmine exhaled slowly, the tension ebbing but not entirely gone. The manager approached her, offering a warm smile. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Miss Carter. We'll ensure you're seated where you belong." Gratitude softened Jasmine's expression. "Thank you." As the plane ascended into the sky, the cabin gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Yet, beneath the surface, the echoes of the confrontation lingered, a stark reminder of the invisible barriers that still divided even in spaces meant for comfort and escape. Jasmine settled back into her seat, the plush leather a small comfort amid the lingering unease. She gazed out the window at the clouds drifting by, their vastness a stark contrast to the cramped tensions within the cabin. Around her, passengers resumed their conversations, the flight crew attentive but watchful. Jasmine's mind raced with thoughts of the moment, the confrontation, the silent stares, the quiet battles fought in spaces like this. She reached into her bag and touched the small photo of the children she had cared for during her mission, drawing strength from their resilience. This was more than a flight. It was a microcosm of a larger fight for dignity and respect. The manager returned briefly, confirming that the situation was resolved and that Jasmine would remain in first class for the duration of the flight. His words brought a measure of relief, but Jasmine knew the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. As the plane cruised steadily through the night sky, Jasmine allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The ordeal had tested her patience and resolve, but it had also illuminated the strength within her strength, born from years of service and sacrifice. She looked around the cabin once more, noting the subtle shifts in demeanor, the tentative glances of support from some passengers. The journey was far from over, but in this moment, Jasmine felt a flicker of hope. The flight continued on. A vessel carrying more than passengers sit carried the weight of unspoken stories, of battles fought in silence, and of the enduring quest for equality in a world still learning to see beyond appearances. The cabin settled into a cautious quiet as Jasmine Carter remained seated, the manager's presence lending an unexpected calm to the atmosphere. Yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of curiosity and disbelief rippled among the passengers and crew alike. Moments after the manager's assurance, he called the lead flight attendant aside, speaking in hushed tones that carried a weight beyond the immediate conflict. Jasmine observed from her seat, her senses sharp despite the exhaustion that still clung to her. The flight attendant returned, her expression shifting from uncertainty to a composed smile as she approached Jasmine once more. "Miss Carter," she began gently, "there's something I need to share with you. It's about your status with Skylux Airways." Jasmine blinked, intrigued but wary. "My status?" The attendant nodded. "Yes. It turns out your family owns a significant share of the airline. You're actually one of the major stakeholders." A stunned silence fell over Jasmine, the revelation settling over her like a sudden downpour. She reached into her bag, pulling out her phone to confirm, then stared at the screen as the reality clicked into place. The privileges she had taken for granted, the first-class ticket, the seamless boarding, were tied to a legacy she had never fully understood. The attendant continued, "That's why you're entitled to all first-class privileges. We apologize for the confusion and the way you were treated." Jasmine's gaze swept across the cabin, taking in the faces of passengers and crew, many of whom now looked at her with a mix of surprise and regret. The woman who had challenged her earlier sat silently, her earlier defiance replaced by an uneasy acknowledgement of the mistake. The manager stepped forward once again, addressing the cabin with a composed voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we want to apologize for the earlier disturbance and any discomfort it may have caused. We are committed to ensuring our policies respect all passengers equally." Whispers of approval and murmurs of understanding spread through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged glances, the incident sparking quiet conversations about assumptions and biases that had gone unchecked. Jasmine sat back, the weight of the moment pressing on her. The irony was not lost on her that her family's ownership, unknown to her until now, had become the catalyst for this confrontation. But beneath the irony lay a deeper truth about the disconnect between those who hold power and those on the front lines, tasked with enforcing policies. The flight attendant returned with a small gift bag, a token of apology from the airline. Jasmine accepted it graciously, acknowledging the gesture but knowing the real work was just beginning. As the flight progressed, Jasmine noticed a subtle shift in the crew's demeanor, renewed attentiveness and respect that contrasted sharply with the earlier tension. Passengers who had been wary now engaged in quiet conversations, some seeking to understand the complexities unveiled by the incident. Jasmine reached for her notebook, jotting down thoughts and reflections. The encounter had peeled back layers of systemic issues, how ignorance and assumptions could fuel discrimination, even in spaces designed for luxury and comfort. She thought of the children she had served abroad, their resilience in the face of hardship, a stark contrast to the petty prejudices displayed here. Their strength became her guide, a reminder that dignity was not granted by status or wealth, but by the unwavering assertion of one's humanity. The manager approached once more, offering a sincere apology on behalf of the airline and promising a company-wide review of training and policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. Jasmine nodded, appreciating the commitment, but aware that change required more than words. It demanded action and accountability. As the plane cruised steadily toward its destination, the incident became a catalyst for conversations among passengers and crew alike. What had begun as a personal confrontation evolved into a collective reckoning with the subtle biases embedded in everyday interactions. Jasmine looked out the window, watching the horizon blur beneath the wing. The sky stretched endlessly, a vast canvas of possibility and challenge. In that moment, she understood that her journey was not just about returning home, but about carrying forward the learned lessons about resilience, justice, and the ongoing fight to dismantle the barriers that divide. The flight continued. A vessel carrying more than passengers carried stories, struggles, and the enduring hope for a future where respect and dignity are afforded to all, regardless of background or circumstance. The plane's engines hummed steadily as it glided through the late afternoon sky, the sun casting long, golden streaks across the clouds below. Jasmine Carter sat back in her first-class seat, the plush leather embracing her weary frame, yet her mind was far from at ease. The events that had unfolded during the flight played over and over in her thoughts, a painful echo of the prejudice she had faced, tangled with the ironic revelation of her family's ownership in the airline. She pulled the small photo from her bag once more, the faces of the children she had cared for during her humanitarian mission smiling up at her. Their resilience had fueled her through countless challenges, but this recent encounter had cut deeper than she expected. The sting of being judged, questioned, and nearly displaced despite her rightful place was a harsh reminder that dignity was still too often conditional, dictated by perception rather than truth. Jasmine's fingers traced the edges of the photograph as she reflected on the irony of her own ignorance about her family's stake in Skylux Airways. How had she remained unaware? How could such a disconnect exist between ownership and the lived realities of those on the ground? The incident opened her eyes not just to her own circumstances, but to the systemic gaps that allowed bias and misunderstanding to flourish unnoticed. She glanced around the cabin, now calm and subdued, passengers quietly engaged in their own thoughts or conversations. The earlier tension had softened, replaced by a tentative respect that felt both fragile and necessary. Jasmine understood that behind the polite smiles and apologies lay a much larger conversation, one about equity, respect, and the invisible barriers that still divided people in spaces meant for comfort and escape. In the days following the flight, Jasmine resolved to use her voice to advocate for change within the airline and beyond. The incident was more than a personal affront. It was a mirror reflecting the broader issues of systemic bias, embedded in everyday interactions, often unnoticed but deeply felt. She reached out to the airline's leadership, proposing initiatives for comprehensive diversity training, policy reviews, and community engagement programs aimed at fostering understanding and respect among staff and passengers alike. Her efforts began to resonate. The airline initiated a company-wide review of its policies, emphasizing cultural competency and empathy in customer service. Staff underwent training to recognize and challenge their own biases, and a new passenger feedback system was implemented to ensure concerns about discrimination were addressed promptly and transparently. Jasmine found herself invited to speak at corporate events, sharing her experiences and insights on the importance of representation and respect. Her story became a catalyst for dialogue, inspiring others to confront uncomfortable truths and work toward a more inclusive environment. Yet, amid these strides forward, Jasmine remained grounded in the knowledge that change was incremental and ongoing. She continued her nursing work, returning to communities in need, carrying with her the lessons learned from both her humanitarian missions and the flight that challenged her in unexpected ways. One evening, as she prepared for another trip, Jasmine stood in the airport terminal, ticket in hand, this time fully aware of the journey ahead, not just across miles, but through the complex terrain of justice and equality. The airline staff greeted her with genuine warmth, their smiles reflecting a shift in attitude born of reflection and growth. As she boarded the plane, Jasmine felt a quiet strength settle within her. The path was far from easy, But each step taken was a step toward a future where respect and dignity were not privileges reserved for a few, but rights afforded to all. Looking out the window as the plane ascended, she allowed herself a moment of hope. The sky stretched endlessly before her, a vast horizon of possibility and change. In that boundless expanse, Jasmine saw not just the journey home, but the ongoing fight for a world where every person could travel through life with the simple, unassailable right to be seen, heard, and valued. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.